I'm going to try and be a ruthless moderator because I know that our time is very, very tight, and I want to be sure that the panelists have a chance to respond to each other and sort of build from the comments. So I'm going to start with one general question, and if you could each take, a minute or a bit to give us a primary principle, a main idea, something that you're passionate about from your perspective, particularly your discipline or your field or your area of expertise. Inequality in education. It's an enduring, endless conversation, and we continue, as Anna said, to have so much work to do. What do you think, from your perspective, is one primary reason that inequality persists? Anna, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Lynn. That's a really good question, and we can answer this question in many different ways. I think I would like to start by saying that inequality persists because maybe the resources should be distributed not just in an equal way, but in an equitable way. Okay. And I think the first and foremost important issue here is distinguish between equality and equity. When we talk about equality, we think about the distribution of resources. So we assume that to have more equality in education, we should have resources, the same resources to each school and each student. While the issue of equity and fairness and inclusion are a little bit different. So why inequality persists is maybe also because those that are most in need do not get a fair share of the resources. And when we did, tell me if I'm going beyond the 1 minute, but when we published the Inclusion and Education report in 2020, we said that there is one thing that's really important, is all means all. And so this means that inclusion should be looked at the way to value every learner, to value the potential of everyone, and do not distribute the chances according to the background of individuals. And I think this is not happening everywhere. I just show on purpose the chart on education financing, because education financing should be a priority in each country. And unfortunately, it is not. And there are two benchmarks that concern finance in education, and very few countries attain this benchmark. I would say half of countries have not attained these two benchmarks about the amount of spending on education. So it's about resources, but it's about also training of teachers, it's about classroom, it's about giving safe and learning environment to students, and caring, we heard about this thing, making everybody learn, and ensuring that parents and communities are involved. So inclusion and equity or equality are not a process that should be enforced from the top, but require everyone to participate. And that's a reason why inequality persists, maybe.
Okay. So it sounds as though the inequitable distribution of resources becomes kind of a tipping point for lots of other inequities. George, an answer from you that might be different. What in addition to inequitable distribution?
I think, my microphone's not on as far as I can tell, but I think
we can hear you, so
that
it's good.
Korea has done an admirable job of making high connectivity internet available to everyone in Korea. That has been key to a strong education, and we're reminded that only half the people in the world have good connectivity to the internet, or any connectivity to the internet. So already there's this tremendous inequality, and when it started going in the United States, that was very clear that people who were well off could afford for their children internet to their home, computers at the time. Now you can do it on your smartphone, and so forth. It's very important. And there is a revolution going on in education which people don't notice. Sitting right there this morning before the thing, I took a Duolingo course in Spanish. So make sure to keep my streak going, 180 days. I do it on the free. Nora, who's sitting there next to me, she has 580 days in a row on, learning French, and she pays, I think, about 100 a year, right? Some people can't afford 100 a year. They have to have a smartphone, and then they have to pay for access to this education. That's an example of education. But even in Korea, the education isn't. It's much. The opportunities are very good. But I did interaction with Seoul High School of Science. Those are really outstanding students. It's like taking your best, athletes and training them, and they have great stuff. And I went to them and I did what's actually effective teaching, which was funny. I went to the creativity. A student asked for money to do some of these things that I'll tell you about. And it happened that the transit of Venus across, a beautiful transit of Venus across the sun was happening at that time. And I asked them to design an experiment and told them how they can design it. They had more. They had telescope accessibility, so they can make a projection and measure it. And I arranged for a school in Australia to coordinate with them so that they could measure the distance to the sun very accurately and then report back to me when I came back afterwards. And they explained what they did and what they measured and so forth. And then one of the students was explaining how come they didn't get exactly the 150 million kilometers. They only got 140 million kilometers. And it's hands-on experience. Understanding statistics, they needed to do it more times or have simulations. That's the most effective way you can educate. Having a teacher in a classroom is actually very inefficient way of doing education. People aren't realizing that because it's tradition, right?
So can I just sort of connect what you're saying? Because it sounds as though you're talking again about this idea of when you have the resources, you're able to do amazing things.
Right.
And the
So
question
rich
goes back to
people-
what Anna said about the distribution. So let me just move on to the other panelists because I'm just worried about our time and I want to
All
be
right,
sure
sorry.
everyone gets a chance.
If we have time, I'll tell you about
Yes,
actually doing the thing that Professor Shen said. And it gave me more than half my contact hours with students in my whole teaching life. 40 years of teaching, and in that course it was taught twice. Gave me 70,000 times 10 weeks.
That sounds like a lot. Thank you. Yeah. So Moon-jeong?
So from a perspective of parents raising a little kid, I want to talk about elementary education inequality. When I was a student, there was saying that a dragon was born in a stream. But in these days, it appears highly unlikely because children in poor income, in low-income family, they were small opportunity to get an early child education and also limited access to the extracurricular activities. And that make impact when they become high school, middle school student. And I also want to acknowledge, the growing significance, the family residential place. So, for example, the school in the big city, of course, a lot of resource there, but schools in suburban place, they have an obvious limited resource and, unfortunately, less experienced teachers and also limited access to the information and technology, and that gap was widened during this COVID pandemic. So I think that's the one of the big issue from the beginning, from the young age, this inequality start. And other thing is during this COVID pandemic, I experienced that we do that inequality unintentionally. Nobody recognized, but we do by even myself. So last year, I had an opportunity to mentor an internship student in my lab, and she was the last semester of her fourth year. And I noticed that she has a huge drop in her GPA in her second and third year. So I assumed that she didn't pay too much effort to her study during that time. It's quite usual actually. But when I asked her, she answered to me that she has a hearing impairment. And it was almost impossible to follow Zoom in a class because you share the screen, the video getting very small, so hard to recognize her, the teacher's mouth. And even in transitioning back to in-person lecture, nothing changed because teacher wear mask. But even myself, I do the class, but I couldn't recognize I have that student in my class because no one actually informed me, no one tell me the guidance. So this kind of things is unintentionally, so we can actually solve very quickly.
So it sounds as though, again, you are offering another sort of perspective on inequality and inequitable distribution of resources, but you've added one thing, which is the assumptions that we make of learners.
Yes.
So Zul, your thought on this?
Thank you. I want to go back to where you started, Lynn. I think education is about leveling up society. And that's where I look at quality or inequality for that matter. And for that, I think there are 4 things that I would want to achieve. I call it the 4 A's. One is, to start off with, is it available? In technology, for example, is the technology available? If the technology is available, then it's already a function of equality. If it's available, is it accessible? Right? Sometimes you have the technology, but only to certain people, certain portion, others are not accessible. Majority are not accessible to it. If it is accessible, are they affordable? And the other A, sometimes you can't afford it, especially high tech nowadays, you can't afford it. And the last one is, of course, the other is appropriate. Is it appropriate? In your context. Doesn't mean all technology is appropriate to you. It depends on your context, your needs, and your wants. You cannot just have a one-size-fits-all. So if you use these 4 as a guidance, then perhaps you can get closer to what equality is or inequality, depending on what you are. So to me, it's quite well laid out. And when we want to make a decision, we look at these 4 A's. If the 4 A's are met, then I think we'll go for it. Otherwise, we'll stand back and see what else we can do to make it more equitable. Thank you.
So Zul, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Let me stay with you, and I'll just move in reverse order. So if you had a magic wand, and you could put in place one intervention, one something that would be a powerful tipping point change, what would it be?
Well, I guess this is the whole idea of how we can come together as a group that supports each other. We begin to think of humanity as an issue. When you look at the pandemic, I think that's what was missing. We know that it's a humanitarian problem. Everybody faces it, no matter wherever you are. But the moment the vaccine comes in, then you see the world is in the divide again. You see, the whole idea that we are together, having the same problem, we are supposed to sympathize with one another. When the vaccine comes in, that somehow that disappeared very quickly. So these values, Lynn, of the 3 things that I want to emphasize, can we learn how to sympathize with one another? If you do not know how to sympathize with your neighbor, forget about the world. You will not be able to sympathize with the world. If you're able to sympathize, can you empathize? In other words, can you go out and do what you need to do within your own limits to make it happen so that everybody shares? If you can sympathize, can you be compassionate? And then these 3 values must be in the new education system if you want to achieve equality. If you don't have that, if you just work as for livelihood, as mechanical, then I think we will never achieve this. So these 3 values, I think, is important. So I'm talking about value-based education at the same time to achieve equality.
Thank you. So, Moon Jung, based on what you just heard Zul talk about in relation to this idea of inequity and inequality, one tipping point change that you would put in place?
As Anna says and I said, I think research is more very important. As said, so I think the government-driven reallocation of the asset to school funding equally, in particular, I think, as I mentioned in the last part of my comment, so they probably need to allocate more funding of the small school to serve the disadvantaged community, because we are living in the area of the low birth rate, and now we need to teach every single student because that's the only way we can survive in the future. So most important, distributing resource properly and even more to the disadvantaged community.
As Anna said, it's not just all means all, but all must mean all if we are to survive. George.
I've got many stories to tell, but let me think about an example because it's hard. We have credence capability coming up in chatbots. For the last 4.5 years, there have been 5 chatbots who've taken medical exams in different countries and have done better than 85 or 90% of the people. You can think about teaching via chatbots and so forth, but I'll give you an example of an attempt to bring up some inequality. So I was very interested in helping Africa develop because it's been a kind of a neglected country. And I was friends with the president of Eutelsat, and I convinced him to make some data, some satellite communication data available to Africa to send information down. And I worked with some people out of the Vatican they were very interested in making converts. To provide small villages in Africa, small towns in Africa, satellite receiving stations, so that they could do part of the Catholic Church, but we could send education stories down there. Problem came up in that the Catholic Church got inflamed in certain controversies, and we thought it was better not to be associated with them at the time. But in fact, you have to think there is a way to reach even poor countries, provided you can provide them the electronic connectivity. And we even have made these small kiosks with solar cells on the top so that people can come and charge their cell phones, even though they live in the bush and so forth. There is a way to provide connectivity to the whole world, and that's the way we're going to do it. And we don't need to train quite so many teachers if we train the chatbots to individually tutor people. I mean, there is a way we can do it and afford it.
There's a way, and we can afford it. Anna.
Thank you. So one thing, I just start by saying SDG 4 is about leaving no one behind.
Mm-hmm.
So leaving no one behind covers everything we have been saying here. And there is one thing that is really important, is start early. So early childhood education lies the foundation. And is really, there are too many kids nowadays that are still outside this kind of education. And the education system should also teach kids how to learn and what they learn. And this is not just learning about facts, it is about learning how to recognize true from fake. And so this is about developing critical skills. And this is very important, especially for the topic we are discussing today.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And this means also teacher training and quality in classroom. So there is not, and why I started by saying SDG 4? Because SDG 4 provides, the Sustainable Development Goal 4 provides a list of targets. And each of these targets are really important and say what should be the roadmap. But there is no country that is on track to achieve this roadmap. But I think one important is start early, really.
Okay. Thank you for that. So this morning when President Oak opened up the ceremony, I was struck by something that he said, and I'd like to ask you all about it. He said education is sort of the gift that parents pass on to their children. And it just made me think about all the parents who desire to give their children that gift, but may not have the means. And means lots of things. It's not just money. And it also caused me to think, what if education were the gift that society or governments passed on to their children or its children? What do you think about that? Education as a human right, as a social right,
Yes.
that it shouldn't just be dependent upon what your parents dream for you, although all parents dream for their children.
I think that even resource allocation same. I mentioned that paying more resource to the small school, that makes some people very upset who pay more tax to the country, right? So it's getting consensus very difficult. So it's a time for sustained effort and communication among many bodies like policymaker, parents, teacher, and student. So without consensus, this kind of the system never will be created. So we have to aware of that. We have a few number of the kids, small number. So it's time we think about what to do in the future. So.
George?
I thought that it is a difficult question. When we talk about governments, normally it's a difficult question. But I thought education must remain apolitical. In other words, there is a neutral value that all of us can accept, regardless of what sort of government we have. Because at the end of the day, it is about everybody. And you can never get everybody on one platform as far as political is concerned. So how to create a kind of a neutral environment that all human beings can benefit? I think it's a difficult question, but this is one of the issues that I think we are grappling with when education gets politicized. When it gets politicized, and then it moves into a certain direction that sometimes does not fulfill the needs of others, and that's where I think the clash comes in, clash of civilization, whatever you want to talk about it. So how to then you make it normative in a neutral way that everybody can have a common platform. And this way I go back to this whole idea of spirituality. I think this is something that we are common in that particular sense. How do you move it? Then we are trying to produce under Sustainable Development Goal, what we call Sustainable Development Goal 18. You only have 17, but we're talking an 18 one is good. We are talking about spirituality. How can you create another set of values that all of us can come together regardless of where we are?
Okay.
So George and then Anna.
Can I be controversial?
Yes, of course.
More so than I was. So I want to put this in really stark contrast. It will not be that very long before parents who want to can have their embryo child DNA modified to have all the knowledge up through a college education. The amount of information you learn your whole life is less than is encoded on your gene, double the length of the gene. You can have all the information. It's like you went to every class and did every homework problem and you were the top student. Okay. Would you choose that for your child? Along with smarter genes and prettier genes and more athletic genes, right? Okay, some people will, right? That's going to happen. You can do that cybergenetically too. You can provide people AI systems that will make them effectively smart, right, and well-educated. Some people will choose to do that. If it's a gift from parents, they'll do that. If it's a gift from the government, it's going to be more complicated. So think about the implications to society and to humans given the kind of opportunities you have in the future. And they're not far away. I mean, it used to be people thought, oh, climate change, it's bad, but I'll be dead by the time it happens. Well, they were wrong. Climate change is going to be a big crisis. But this kind of stuff is coming along too. There's all these wonderful opportunities, but there's all these very complex ethical issues that come with it. So when you start saying the government should provide the education, think about what they might provide.
So it sounds as though SDG 18 is definitely needed. Yeah. Anna.
Yeah, so I will start from where you started about education. What is education? Is a gift. Education is a gift. It is a human right, should be a human right. It is also a public good. So, and this is very important because it means that I remember working on the intergenerational transmission of disadvantage or advantages. One of the things that could break the cycle of disadvantage is precisely education. Education cannot be for a few, it should be for all. And it should be for all in the same way, quality. It should be quality and inclusive. So the point is, we were talking about an enabling environment. So the role of government, the government has a huge role to play in making this possible. But having legislation and policy is not all if they are not enforced. So the important thing is how to get these policies and legislation implemented. And the only way you can do it well is to make communities and every one of us to take part in that. So the role of civil society organization, for instance, is very important as watchdog for the human rights, for the rights to education, the implementation of the right to education. The role of parents, the role of the mediator between the school and the parents is fundamental because, as you said, there are parents and very often those that are with low resources that are not involved. They cannot participate in education of the children. So it is a gift, but we want to find ways to be a gift for all and not just for a few.
Right. Perfect timing. I want to thank panelists. And I heard some common themes. One common theme is that there is a way, that it is possible to do, but there are many ethical considerations that must be considered. Please join me in thanking our panelists today for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
If you would stand in the way.
Thank you very much.